BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello, Nedheads. Hello, Black Box Battalion. Today is Friday, another Cooper Friday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? On Fridays, I talk to you guys about D.B. Cooper, the man responsible for the only unsolved skyjacking in U.S. aviation history. And in this episode, I will be responding to the new video from Bill Rollins about his D.B. Cooper suspect, Joe Lakich, looking at his book, The Elusive D.B. Cooper, and of course continuing with the Cooper Profile segment, which is all about the psychological profiling of skyjackers. And you guys know the drill. You can hit the like button if you want, subscribe if you haven't, and drop a comment down below if you have something to say about D.B. Cooper. For larger things, you can send them to me at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. And I am your host, Box Ned. Now, some of you might remember that I've done an episode in the past about Joe Lakich as a D.B. Cooper suspect, and I even did a follow-up one called Suspect Joe Lakich Extended Edition. But the reason for this one is, firstly, Bill Rollins released a new video outlining the profile for his suspect, Joe Lakich. You can find that on his YouTube channel, Bill Rollins, and I'll be discussing that in this episode. But also, I think that this particular person of interest stands out to me because Joe Lakich was the first suspect that I talked about on Cooper Friday. He wasn't the subject of the first episode, but he was the first individual suspect that I made a video about for this segment here on YouTube and also on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere you get your podcasts, you can download this program. So I guess you'd say that I'm paying close attention to what happens with Joe Lakich and the developments, as well as new information that comes out about him, and I also want to be very clear about some things. I might sound critical of Bill Rollins in this video. I might say some things that sound like I'm disagreeing with him, but overall, I think very highly of Joe Lakich as a suspect. I have an entire D.B. Cooper suspects playlist here on Black Box Online Radio, but from the very start, I thought that Joe Lakich was a strong suspect, and I think that he was a strong suspect. And I'm just going to say it very clearly. There's a chance that Joe Lakich was D.B. Cooper. He could have been the real D.B. Cooper. And I think that he goes into what I call a mid-level suspect. He belongs in the mid-tier. And I was talking about this on a different segment here on Black Box Online Radio. Every Wednesday I do a segment about Jack the Ripper. And just by chance, I was also talking about someone who was an upper middle-of-the-deck suspect. And that's where I would put Joe Lakich. He might not be my top suspect. Maybe I can think of other suspects that I would rank more highly than Joe Lakich, that I would rank higher than Joe Lakich, but he is definitely worthy of strong consideration. Now I'm going to play a clip from Bill Rollins' new video. It's about 5 minutes long, and then I'll respond. If you do want to watch the full video, it's available on his channel, Bill Rollins. The full video is about 24 minutes long, and there's going to be a lot of information in it. So let's play the clip and respond.
Known in 1971 as retired Major Joe Lakich, was D.B. Cooper. I state this as fact without any hesitation or reservation. Let me explain the reasons why. There are a number of major attributes that any suspect must fit to be D.B. Cooper. The first is that he must have the training, most likely military training, to complete his mission. Cooper didn't need instructions on how to don his parachute. He had access to information about how to safely jump from the rear of a Boeing 727. He also knew that Flight 305 could take off without filing a flight plan. Not just any person walking the street has this knowledge. I am a pilot, and pilots represent only about 1% of the U.S. population. But I don't know how to properly put on a parachute. However, Joe had over 20 years in the Army, taught military science and tactics at Gettysburg College, and spent the last 10 years of his military career as an officer in logistics. Joe knew how to plan a mission. As a conservative number, Joe is 1 in 100 for this attribute. Next is the most overlooked evidence in this case, the Dan Cooper connection. FBI Special Agent Larry Carr postulated that Cooper was in the military and stationed in Europe, where he took an interest in the Dan Cooper comics. Also, Albert Weinberg, creator of the Dan Cooper comics, believed D.B. Cooper was a man who not only saw his books, but read his stories. Joe was in the military, stationed in Germany for 3 years in the late 1950s, and multilingual. Joe could have both seen and read the Dan Cooper comics. I will use another conservative estimate of 1 in 100 for this attribute. Other than Joe, there are no suspects who can adequately explain all of the particles found in Cooper's clip-on tie. But working in electronics manufacturing, namely the production of capacitors, these particles align with Joe's workplace. These particles include rare and exotic metals like pure titanium, bismuth, gold, silver, and palladium. This U.S. patent, dating back to 1970, calls for a capacitor that included titanium, bismuth, gold, silver, and palladium in its construction. This is an extremely rare workplace, and Joe wore a tie in this facility. A conservative estimate is 1 in 10,000 men wore a tie in this type of manufacturing environment. Next, to be D.B. Cooper, one must fit the physical description. Most suspects are too short, too stout, don't have enough hair on their head, have the wrong color eyes, and so forth. In Jeffrey Gray's book Skyjack, on page 119, FBI Special Agent Ralph Himmelsbach tells Jeff that Kenny Christensen is too short, too heavy, and has the wrong color eyes. But Joe has a perfect match with the FBI description and is even described as having a dark complexion. And people who knew Joe tell me that FBI sketch sure looks like Joe. These people, and even Joe's son, agree with me. Joe Lakich was D.B. Cooper. So let's use another conservative number of 1 in 100 for this attribute. Now we must consider one of the most important aspects of any escapade such as this one, and that is motivation. Death is a real potential outcome for this hijacking. But Joe had serious motivation. This hijacking wasn't a theft, but a highly charged, emotionally driven event. Joe told Tina that the reason for the hijacking was that he had a grudge to settle. Joe was very vocal in the media and in public conversations, stating that the FBI was responsible for his daughter's untimely death. And again, this is another aspect that differentiates Joe Lakich from all other suspects. For Joe, this hijacking was a publicity stunt, if you will. The 5/8 November incident of October 4th, 1971, in which his daughter was murdered, became old news. It was receiving no additional coverage.
And once again, those were the words of Bill Rollins, and he was outlining the suspect profile for Joe Lakich. Now I have some immediate responses, and the first relates to how he is creating these probabilities for his suspect to have been D.B. Cooper. First and foremost, he's saying that D.B. Cooper had military training, and Joe Lakich had military training. But one of the most important things to note about Joe Lakich is, by Bill Rollins' own admission in that video, he was involved with military planning and logistics, but he was not a pilot, and he did not necessarily have that type of aviation background that one might expect for D.B. Cooper. And furthermore, not everyone is in agreement that D.B. Cooper was in the military at all. You will find suspects from time to time who don't have military backgrounds. What do they have instead? Aviation backgrounds. connections to Boeing. And the reason why I bring this up is later on in the video, outside of that 5-minute clip, Bill Rollins is going to speak very highly of Pat Brown and talk about our psychological profiling video that she made about D.B. Cooper earlier this year. And I also have an episode about that, which I invite you to listen to here on Black Box Online Radio, a direct response to hers. But she was not of the mindset that D.B. Cooper was in the military at all. But he's saying that, she's saying this thing about how, okay, you cannot change who you are. Your personality is going to come through. Your education is going to come through. Your mindset is going to come through. But Pat Brown uses all of the same evidence to say that D.B. Cooper was not in the military for numerous reasons, which she goes into in her video and in my response. But ultimately, what would be the alternative? Someone had aviation experience and aviation training. Where could they get that? From a company like Boeing. So not everyone is in complete agreement that D.B. Cooper was in the military, although I personally would think that he was, purely because of what we've just said. He may have been in the military with some type of aviation-related task, and you're going to see that there are lots of suspects out there who have aviation-related jobs, and also they had something that might be outside the realm of being a pilot, but they worked on airplanes. Skip Hall would be one of them. And in terms of the other points in this video, the absolute biggest one from what you just heard in that clip there came in relation to the Dan Cooper comics. Now, this again is something that is theoretical. It's highly possible, but we don't know with certainty that D.B. Cooper took his name from the Dan Cooper comics. When he bought his ticket going from Portland to Seattle, he used the name Dan Cooper, which is the name of a Canadian character from a Belgian comic that was written in the French language. And another major issue that I had with Bill Rollins' presentation was he's saying that, okay, his suspect, Joe Lakich, was multilingual. He was bilingual in Serbian and English, and later he learned Italian, which, all of this stuff is shared in Bill Rollins' video, and it was reported that he knew other languages as well. I totally understand that someone who is fluent in 3 languages, who is stationed in Europe, would have the propensity to learn other foreign languages, to be curious about other foreign languages, but knowing Serbian, English, and Italian does not mean that you're going to have an immediate understanding of the French language. It also doesn't mean that he was familiar with the Dan Cooper comics at all. It would be a very big difference to say, oh yeah, when he was stationed in Europe, he had a whole box of Dan Cooper comics. If you had somebody come forward and say that, oh yeah, he learned French pretty quickly, and he read Dan Cooper comics. That's not what I'm hearing. I'm just hearing that he was fluent in English, Serbian, and Italian. I know what Bill Rollins is trying to do. He's trying to say, this guy had the ability to learn languages rather fast. He was stationed in Europe. He probably learned about Dan Cooper from there. He took the name Dan Cooper from the comic book character, and he incorporated it into the D.B. Cooper persona. Or he chose to use that name because Dan Cooper is this skydiving hero that was featured in a comic book. I understand the mindset, but that is just one possibility. Here's an alternative possibility. Joe Lakich may have not been familiar with Dan Cooper at all. He might not even have seen the Dan Cooper comics. Was he stationed in Belgium or France? You just heard very clearly from Bill Rollins in that clip that for 3 years he was stationed in Germany. So it's not impossible, but it's also not certifiable. Now I want to say some praiseworthy things about Bill Rollins' presentation. Absolutely, one thing that I think he was spot on about is that Joe Lakich matches the physical description of D.B. Cooper. The height, the weight, the physical appearance, the brown hair and the brown eyes, and also the olive skin complexion. As previously stated, Joe Lakich was of Serbian descent, and he would have had the darker olive-skinned complexion that some people have when they grow up in Southern Europe, even in the Mediterranean or Adriatic regions. Some people from Eastern Europe also have darker olive skin complexions, and he even shared that photo of Joe Lakich that does seem to have an olive skin complexion, olive skin tone. I think all of that stuff is completely spot on. I also think that one of the points that Bill Rollins is trying to make, again, arguing on his behalf, is that Joe Lakich was very smart. Even if he didn't teach things that were related to skydiving, he could have figured it out. He knew how to plan military operations. And I openly told you guys, Joe Lakich is an upper middle of the deck suspect. He is the type of person that I think could have pulled this off, and he could have pulled this off reasonably well. And also, the thing you heard about him being an electrical engineer and that he had the connections to the rare metallic elements that are found on D.B. Cooper's tie, I will also give that strong consideration. The problem is, though, I think that Bill Rollins is using these numbers in a completely inappropriate manner. Just saying that, it's 1 in a trillion that anybody else could be D.B. Cooper. Joe Lakich matches all of these things to a 1 in the trillion odds. No, not at all. There are other suspects who have explanations for the tie. There are other suspects who have explanations for the Dan Cooper comics, which we aren't even certain of. Let's look at the tie, for example. Vince Peterson becomes a suspect because of his connections to the rare elements that could be found on D.B. Cooper's tie. Vince Peterson, who was brought forward by Eric Eulis as a suspect. And just recently on Cooper Friday, I was talking to you guys about Fred Milton Lane, who owned shares of the Midnight Mines in Alaska that dealt with what? Rare metallic elements, including uranium. And furthermore, word on the street is that there's a suspect out there named Ted B. Braden, perhaps you've heard of him, and that all but one of the rare metallic elements can be accounted for on D.B. Cooper's tie with a link to Ted Braden. So that's something that's worthy of consideration. So I noticed from the very start, when I did that first episode on Joe Lakich more than a year ago for Cooper Friday, that Bill Rollins is just saying my suspect is the only one that checks all the boxes. There's a 1 in a trillion chance that we can find D.B. Cooper, and I found him because he's the only one that checks all the boxes. No, there are other suspects out there. And I will also provide a bit of challenge and pushback by saying that there are some physical similarities between Joe Lakich and D.B. Cooper. And I told you that I thought he matched the physical description very well. But I think that he mostly resembles one of the D.B. Cooper composites, the Cary Grant sketch. And we have to remember that there are multiple sketches. And I don't necessarily think that Joe Lakich matches composite A very closely. You saw that Bill Rollins was using composite B, and he does that very, very good side by side with the Cary Grant sketch. But also composite C, I don't think Joe Lakich resembles composite C at all, let alone the wavy gravy sketch. And yes, I stole that from Ryan Burns. He called it that, the wavy gravy sketch. Joe Lakich has a fair amount of resemblance to that, but he goes into the category of he resembles one of the sketches. He resembles one of the composites. I have an entire episode about the composite sketches here on Black Box Online Radio that I made for Cooper Friday. And ultimately, I just want to share some things with you guys that I think that there are suspects out there who resemble the composite sketches from different angles and in different ways. Or, like, say, for example, a suspect like Skip Hall. He resembles multiple composite sketches. In this photo, he looks like composite A, in this one like composite B, in this one like composite C. And even Ted Braden, from very specific angles, can resemble composites A, B, and C. So with Joe Lakich, I'm really only seeing a strong resemblance to one sketch, Wavy Gravy just a little bit, but that one has mostly been dismissed. And I would really like to turn it over to you guys right now. What do you think about anything that you heard in that video? What do you think about Joe Lakich as a D.B. Cooper suspect? But one of the things that I've meant to do in the past is to look at the book, The Elusive D.B. Cooper, which was made and written by Bill Rollins. And I would actually like to look at the introduction that he has written out here. And I'm going to have read. This is all citing from his material. Suffices to say, the FBI has totally underestimated D.B. Cooper. The FBI considers Cooper to be a hardened criminal who is likely in and out of prison. Their personality profile considers Cooper to be a criminal who is likely desperate for money and commences this crime totally unprepared. Their viewpoint is that Cooper did not survive the jump from the 727. However, they still don't have a dead body, the parachute, nor the ransom money. With one small exception, almost 9 years after the hijacking, in an improbable location, about 20 miles from the suspected drop zone, they have found $5,800 of the original $200,000. Okay, this is actually $6,000. Yet the reason for the money found at this location so far from the drop zone cannot be logically explained. Well, I'm completely on point with Bill Rollins here. I mean, I think that they haven't found the body, they haven't found the money, they haven't found the briefcase, they haven't found the parachutes. That tells me that as of now, it's more logical for us as sleuths and armchair investigators and detectives to think that D.B. Cooper survived the jump. I think all of the evidence is indicating that D.B. Cooper survived the jump. But you can let me know what you think. I know that a lot of people who follow this program actually believe that D.B. Cooper died during the jump. So please, give your explanations in the comments section down below. Thus, the FBI failed in its investigation. Not only because they were slow to mobilize at the jump zone, not only because they mishandled the evidence, not only because they refused to be open-minded, but because they have assumed that D.B. Cooper was not properly prepared for the hijacking. Nothing could be further from the truth. Okay, now, this is going to tie in to the motive for Joe Lakich to commit the skyjacking. Now, as many of you know, and you even heard at the end of the video clip that was from Bill Rollins' channel, that his daughter was killed in a skyjacking. In the 5/8 November skyjacking, she was actually killed by her partner, and it was a terrible, terrible situation. And you also will probably know that Joe Lakich filed suit against the FBI, and he states very clearly that the entire motive for the skyjacking was to make a mockery of the FBI. It wasn't about the money, it was a stunt. It was about getting revenge on the FBI. And I would actually like to turn to Ryan Burns of the D.B. Cooper Sleuth channel, who was discussing this on one of his recent live streams, when he just said, okay, I can comprehend a little bit of the thought process. I'm paraphrasing, mind you. I can comprehend a little bit of the thought process, but how does pulling off the D.B. Cooper heist truly make a mockery of the FBI? How does pulling off the D.B. Cooper heist truly get revenge for the murder of Susan Lakich? I mean, do these things really go hand in hand? Because if you go on the D.B. Cooper Suspects WordPress, you will see that Joe Lakich is listed as the person with the crystal clear grudge. His daughter was killed in a skyjacking, so then he commits a skyjacking to show the FBI how incompetent they are. Well, how does that truly get revenge on the FBI? Would people even connect the dots? Would people even really think that poorly of the FBI? I mean, there might be one or two news stories. I mean, how does that truly, truly get revenge? And I think it's a very fair question. And in fact, I don't think that that is a way for Joe Lakich to get revenge. He would probably be better off filing suit against them and dealing with this very publicly and actually making it about his daughter. But I think a lot of this stuff will be explained in the Cooper Profile segment, which I'll talk to you about in just a second. One more time, I was reading from the book, The Elusive D.B. Cooper, How He Escapes by William S. Rollins III, also known as Bill Rollins. Now, before we start the Cooper Profile segment, I would also invite you guys to check out some of the other content here on Black Box Online Radio. Every Monday I talk about the Zodiac Killer, every Wednesday about Jack the Ripper, every Thursday about the Black Dahlia, and of course every Friday about D.B. Cooper. You're listening to Cooper Friday on Black Box Online Radio. And if you want to support all of these efforts, you can go over to buymeacoffee.com, buymeacoffee.com/blackboxned88, and that allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show, and anybody who makes a donation will get a shout-out on Zodiac Monday. And first, I have a different shout-out to give, and that is to longtime BBOR follower Batman66, who recommended a book to me called The Skies Belong to Us, Love and Terror in the Golden Age of Hijacking. And if you look at the cover of this book, you will see that there's a man and a woman there, and this is actually going to be the tale of a partnership skyjacking, and I'm just going to read the description for you here, because I think it's very relevant to the Cooper Profile segment and the psychological profiling of skyjackers. The true story of America's longest distance hijacking. In an American town torn apart by the Vietnam War and the demise of the 60s idealism, airplane hijackings were astonishingly routine. Over a 5-year period starting in 1968, the desperate and disillusioned seized commercial jets nearly once a week. Using guns, bombs, and jars of acid, some hijackers wished to escape to foreign lands. Others aimed to swap hostages for sacks of cash. Their criminal exploits mesmerized the country, never more so than when the shattered Army veteran Roger Holder and the mischievous party girl Kathy Kirkow managed to commandeer Western Airlines Flight 701 and flee across the ocean with $500,000 in ransom, a heist that remains the longest distance hijacking in American history. More than just an enthralling story about a spectacular crime and its bittersweet, decades-long aftermath, The Skies Belong to Us is also a psychological portrait of America at its most turbulent times and a testament to the madness that can grip a nation when politics fail. And one more time, that was the description of the book. The Skies Belong to Us, Love and Terror in the Golden Age of Hijacking by Brendan I. Kerner. And this is one that I would definitely like to explore in the future. Normally on the Cooper Profile segment, I talk to you guys about the writings of Dr. David G. Hubbard, who was really trying to be a pioneer in the world of psychological profiling because he wanted to relate it to skyjackers. He wrote 2 books called The Skyjacker and Winning Back the Sky. And first, to continue with the Cooper Profile segment, I would like to ask you a challenge question. Was D.B. Cooper afraid to take his own life? I think the answer is absolutely not. And the latest chapter that I was reading in The Skyjacker talks all about this, because it's actually going against some of the things that Joe Lakich would have in his suspect profile. Of course, Joe Lakich isn't mentioned by name in The Skyjacker because even though Bill Rollins believes that Joe Lakich was D.B. Cooper, he wasn't actually convicted for these crimes. He is what we call an accused Skyjacker. And the book The Skyjacker really talks about people who have been convicted, apprehended. Some of them are in jail, some of them are in mental institutions. And one of the key components of skyjacking is power. And almost all the skyjackers are not afraid to die. They aren't afraid to take their own lives because they even view that as a form of power. And the things that Dr. David G. Hubbard really tries to isolate are the reasons why people would do this. What would drive somebody to commit the skyjacking? And in almost all of the cases, it would be an example of a stressor in life. Now, you just heard from that book there, The Skies Belong to Us, the story of a female skyjacker. There is one different female skyjacker that is mentioned in Dr. David G. Hubbard's book, and I have to tell you, I don't mean any disrespect to the ladies out there, but skyjacking seems to be a man's game. Why? Because in these case examples, the skyjackers that are female are accomplices to a man. In The Skies Belong to Us and Gladys the Skyjacker in Dr. David G. Hubbard's book are both doing this because their male partner is orchestrating it and they are going along with it. So it seems like there's a man who has a type of stressor in his life that is causing him to feel like a failure. And he actually doesn't want to commit suicide, but he wouldn't be afraid to do so because he has 2 choices. Either take his own life or try to obtain something illegally. Maybe it is like Joe Lakich and he just wants revenge and he wants to obtain something like fame, or he wants to make a mockery of the FBI and the investigators. But also, he could want the money because he views the money as a form of success. One of the key observations that was made by Dr. David G. Hubbard in The Skyjacker is, it seems that the majority of skyjackers think of themselves as failures. They think that they are men who have failed, and that success is beyond their grasp. Trying to achieve things by a conventional and traditional means is not going to work for them. So what do they want to do? They want to commit a skyjacking because it's a way out. They hate their lives, and even if they take their own lives, that's still a form of power. They hate their lives and they want to hijack an airplane because it represents power to them. They want to take control of things. Oh, I'm never going to be rich by working hard. I'm going to skyjack an airplane and I'm going to do it illegally. So there's this very, very important focus here. But also, in the skyjacker's mind, he might not necessarily think that he's doing anything wrong. Last week on the Cooper Profile, I talked to you guys about how a skyjacker is going to view his actions as less than sinful. That is a quotation from Dr. David G. Hubbard. All right, less than sinful. Well, what is that driving toward? This is somebody who wants to not only obtain something that he thinks he can't do, he can't get by his own means, but he's also going to try and, justify it in his own mind, rationalize it, and he doesn't necessarily think that his actions are that bad. Because even if he gets caught, Dr. Hubbard talks about this very clearly in the most recent chapter, he can still experience a moment of elation. He can still look back on his life and say, I skyjacked an airplane. And that's a way of reshaping his identity. Think about everything that I just said. Think about it all. That somebody is going through a hard time. Their choices, in their own mind, they're like, I have two options. Suicide, or I can do something illegal to try and achieve my goals illegally. If I just work hard and I try to earn money, that's not going to work. I know, because I've done it for years and it didn't play out that way. So they're going to try to commit crimes in the sky, and they're going to try and get away from their own life. And when they're actually busted, they now have a new identity. The person that they were in the past was a failure. Now they can always say, yeah, I was a skyjacker. It's a way of reshaping their thought process. And I couldn't escape thinking about mass shooters. I mean, of course you can talk about serial killers a little bit, but really mass shooters, about people who commit one crime on one day where they're trying to hurt many people, and then they're going to go to jail for the rest of their life. And so many of them have descriptions that sound like these skyjackers. They feel like failures. They are rejected by their peers. They're rejected by women or their chosen intimate partners. They do not think that they can succeed by conventional means. They do not think that they can obtain anything by conventional means. Instead, they just think that my choices are to commit suicide or do something illegal to try and get what I want by illegal means. And they're always going to look back on that shooting that they committed for maybe 15 minutes, 20 minutes, and for the rest of their time in prison, they're just going to think, I'm a mass shooter now. But a big difference between mass shooters and skyjackers is a statement that I shared on last week's Cooper Profile, that the skyjacker really doesn't seem to have the ambition of hurting people. They threaten people. And there are some people like the 9/11 hijackers who actually did want to commit mass murder. But with D.B. Cooper, he did not make any real attempts to hurt anyone on the plane. He threatened to. And most of the skyjackers in Dr. David G. Hubbard's book are acting in the same way. Most of them have the mindset that, all right, well, I'm not actually killing anyone. I'm flirting with the idea of it. I'm not actually assaulting anyone. I'm flirting with the idea of it. They are just telling people what to do to get the money, to get a passage to Cuba, the way that many skyjackers do. So that's why they view their actions as less than sinful. Although I would expect that a lot of mass shooters probably find justifications for their actions, and I would expect that both of them would experience this type of brief elation where, yeah, I got caught, but, I'm going to be a skyjacker for the rest of my life. I'm going to be a mass shooter for the rest of my life. They feel like a failure, so they get to rebuild and rebrand their identity. Well, what do you think about anything that has been shared here? And I would really, really like to know your response to the challenge question. Do you think that D.B. Cooper was afraid to take his own life? According to a book like The Skyjacker, absolutely not. Now, does somebody like Joe Lakich match up with the things in the Cooper Profile? I don't think so, because I don't think Joe Lakich was a failure. I don't think that he was somebody who had any of these type of behaviors. Yes, he was frustrated. Yes, he had a stressor in his life. But ultimately, he seems like somebody who would be in a completely different category. He's an accomplished military man. He is someone who, by Bill Rollins' own admission in the video clip you just heard, had a career not only working in the electrical engineering fields, but also teaching military science. He had so many opportunities And yes, he wants revenge. But again, this isn't the most practical form of revenge. It's not the most beneficial form of revenge. I still cannot deny some of these similarities between Joe Lakich and Cooper. And let's be clear. Let's be clear. I think that everything Bill Rollins is saying could be on point. It's very speculative, but yes, Joe Lakich could have learned about the Dan Cooper comics in Europe. Yes, he could have had the metallic elements on his tie when he's going to work. Yes, he could have planned the skyjacking. Yes, this could have been a revenge plot for the murder of Susan Lakich. All of that stuff could be true. It's just, it's speculative, but it doesn't mean that he's wrong. I do not think that there's a 1 in a trillion chance that we're going to find Cooper and then Bill Rollins just found a guy with 1 in a trillion odds and no one else can meet all these criteria points or check all these boxes. Yes, other suspects can. But let me know what you think about Joe Lakich as a D.B. Cooper suspect. What do you think about the challenge question? Was D.B. Cooper afraid to take his own life? What do you think about any of the stories that were shared in the Cooper Profile segment? I would love to read your responses. You can put them in the comments section down below. And moreover, check out some other content here on Black Box Online Radio. I also release shorts and reels Monday through Friday here on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. My YouTube name is, of course, Black Box Online Radio. My Facebook name is Ned DeHaan, and on Instagram, blackboxned88. And I will see you on Monday for a new episode about the Zodiac Killer. Everybody have a wonderful weekend, and until next time.